All right, we're going to go through this. We're going to go through this test and see if we can get on out of here because I've given Amanda a really adventurous job to do today. The Clean Air Act of 1990 made it illegal for anybody to remove, disconnect, or tamper with emission controls on any vehicle that will be used on public roads. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, let me ask you this. Have you ever personally removed or tampered with emission controls on any vehicle? If you have a procedure that you're performing on a vehicle, let's say that you work on a bunch of vehicles and you've discovered that when somebody's got a little problem with their whatever kind of car it is, not idling quite like it should, and you found out that you can turn this little screw on the throttle body and make it idle a little bit better, and so you do that to a bunch of cars, right? And of course, all your tickets, you write all these tickets up. We did this and we adjusted that and we did that. Okay, there was one shop where this EPA guy came over there with his clipboard and he walked around the shop watching people. And he saw this guy doing this little procedure. And then he went to the shop manual because it was affecting emissions when the guy did it. He goes to the shop manual. He finds that that's not in there anywhere, nor is there a technical service bulletin or a special service message. This is a procedure that this guy has decided that he's going to make an adjustment. He's turning a screw, making an adjustment, changing something on this car. And so he goes and he pulls the, he watches the way the guy writes it up. So he pulls all the tickets that this guy has worked on this particular kind of car, and he sees that the guy has done it to 9 other vehicles. Okay, so each one of those is many thousands of dollars. The fine is very high for the shop because the guy was doing stuff that wasn't, and that's a serious business. And I've seen people that worked in Alabama, they don't pay a lot of attention to it. They don't think about it. When somebody's asking me about cutting their catalytic converter off, I say, if they ever decide to generate some revenue, and if emission standards get tightened up here, and if the government decides to come and say everybody's got to put this back like it was, now you're going to have to go buy a catalytic converter. It's best to leave it there and hang alone. You know what I mean? Now, I've actually bought vehicles that the emissions already been tampered with, and didn't worry about putting them back like they were, but figured like old 80 Model Ford truck I had. But the fact is, that is serious business, and I can't talk enough about how important it is to try to make sure you do all that stuff the way it's supposed to be done. You see what I mean? If the customer won't let you replace a sensor that's bad, then you can't really do anything about that. But it's not an insignificant deal whenever, maybe we're over-regulated. But you can't do anything about that. You're supposed to do what they say. Zeroing an exhaust gas analyzer purges the analyzer with fresh air, samples the air, and then adjusts all the readings to 0 except for oxygen, which will read about 2%. Now that's a peculiar question. That's false. Absolutely false. Exhaust emissions of hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, and oxides of nitrogen must conform to state and federal emission standards for the model of the car being tested. Whenever I say that, color that California, but it says that's number 3. That's question number 3. Is that right? Mm-hmm. All right. Now, that is something that's a peculiar deal right there because my answer key is claiming that one's false.
The answer key?
That's what it says. My answer key, and I didn't write these tests. The person that put this book together wrote this test. Have you seen in the book where it says that?
Oh, that's why you said that's California.
Yeah, think California, and your green states are the ones in the Northeast. That's what they usually. You ever see green state emissions? You ever seen that on anything? You're going to run into that. You're going to run foul of that sooner or later. Green states. That's the states typically up in the Northeast area, up in where all the Philadelphia and the population centers and all that. I don't have those states memorized, but a green state's going to be one that goes up there. They're heavily populated, where they've got different emission standards. I would say my personal. I would say that's true. If you ever wonder why California's got so many old cars, old Mustangs and old Camaros and old Chevrolet, Biscaynes and old other kind of cars, it just has to conform up through the year it was made. And the old cars don't die out there. That's why they keep on going with them. That's pretty cool. If I was gonna do that, I think I'm gonna change that answer key right now. Because I believe that question should be true, don't y'all?
Makes sense.
I'm going to see if I can change the answer key on that one and make it true, because I mean, I may be out of line according to the book, but I believe that that one is absolutely true. Okay, engine cylinder misfires will cause a large increase in CO emissions. Okay, y'all think about what's going out the pipe. Think about what's going out the pipe under what circumstances. Question number 4. What you got coming out of there and what's causing it? We need to go over that again. If you got where does CO emissions come from?
Hydrocarbon and oxygen.
Yeah, if you've got, you remember what I told you before, we talked about this a little bit before. If the mix is right and everything's like it's supposed to, you'll get CO2. You'll get 2 molecules of oxygen that is united during the burn. 2 molecules of oxygen get together with 1 molecule of carbon, you get CO2. If the mixture is too rich,
NOx, isn't it?
no, if the mixture is too rich, you're going to get this.
Yeah, that's right.
Slightly too rich. If the mixture is a lot too rich, then you're going to get HC, which means this. Whenever you take this away, watch this. When you take that away, now you've got this. See what I'm saying? You take the O off C, now you just need to put an H on the other side of it because now you got hydrocarbons. That is your black soot, or in extreme cases, it's actually misty gasoline coming out of the pipe. You got an injector stuck over or something like that. So, one more time, let's back up. We got a misfiring cylinder. So what's coming out of the misfiring cylinder? You're not going to have any NOx coming out of that cylinder because it ain't hot in there. It's got to get really, really hot over 2,500 degrees during the burn to make NOx, which is oxygen and nitrogen getting together. Most of our air is nitrogen. Okay, so what you going to get out the pipe? You're going to get an excess of what? We talked a little yesterday in engine performance about that. You're going to get some oxygen, aren't you? You're also going to have fuel that hasn't burned at all, which is.
Hydrocarbon.
So you don't even have a partial burn. So hydrocarbons and oxygen is what you're going to get out of that cylinder. That's what's coming out of it. That's what's going into the stream from that. Okay, so you're not going to get an increase in CO emissions because of that. The only caveat to that, and like I say, and a lot of these questions are oversimplified. What does the oxygen sensor read? It reads too much oxygen. What does the PCM do in response to that? It ramps the fuel up a little bit. So you may get an increase in CO, but what they're looking for in this particular test, and it's not a perfect world in a test environment like a written test is not a perfect world. You know, I think I say it's not because there's too many ifs, ands, and buts in these test questions. A fuel-saturated charcoal canister signifies a problem in the evap system, and the canister must be replaced. All right, what do you know? What do you know if it's been saturated? Let's back up to start with. How does the canister get saturated with fuel?
When you overfill the thing,
Put too much in there. You know, your canister is just supposed to get vapor, and there's an airspace in the top of it. If you're going to see the tank made like that, and you're also going to see your goodies up in here, like your fuel pump's going to be in there, and in that little fuel pump hookup, you're going to see, or not usually in there, it'll be a fuel tank pressure sensor will be in there, but up here somewhere in the top of this tank, there'll be a little vapor valve, and that little vapor valve is going to have a line that goes to the canister. And if you get it full up too much so that it, sloshes up there and wants to go down that line, it's going to get in that sander. And if the canister is saturated, and we talked about this before, and it starts drawing what it hopes is vapor out of that canister, then you're going to see fuel trims change because of that. You're going to see the engine respond negatively to it. You remember I told you the lady was packing the gas in her car, and whenever you're sitting there idling on these new vehicles, it may start purging the canister just on its own with it sitting there idling. Years ago they didn't do that, but now they'll do it idling. And when it does that, and a bunch of this fuel goes in there, and the engine tries to die, idle air control says, "Whoa, we almost died," and so it goes boom like that, and they're sitting there with their foot on the brake of the light, boom, and sometimes it can run into the back of the car in front of them because they overfilled it. That stuff's pretty well seriously balanced. So basically, yeah, that's true. You're going to have to put you're basically got trouble with the evap system if you got a saturated canister, and the canister must be replaced. Here's another thing that happens with canisters. On some of your earlier vehicles, they just had, the canister has a vent. While we're talking about that, the canister is basically, you're going to have a little, you're going to be pulling the vacuum through there, but right here, you've got a vent. Usually, in the olden days, they just have a little cover over it so a bug wouldn't get in there or something. You know what I'm saying? Well, what's happening when you're pulling this air through here? You're also pulling air in there. I mean, you're pulling air through the canister to purge the vapors out. That's what the canister purge is about. You're using that air. Okay. Well, what also goes in there? Dust.
Yeah.
So I've seen canisters that were clogged up, and they would be loaded with dust. Okay, so now that I'm building this thing so that I want to stop up this vent, and when I stop up this vent so I can apply vacuum, which this right here is going to the gas tank. You see, we're making that real simple. So we're going to stop up this vent, and basically, I say that. I did that wrong. Let's just do this. Let's draw it this way. We're going to come up here, and we're going to let this go to the engine through a valve. It's operated by the computer, right? Okay, so the vacuum is going to purge this. It's going to be stored in here. Okay, the vacuum is going to pull air through there and get that vapor out of there, and it's going to pull dust in there, eventually clogs this up. Well, now that we're wanting to measure this, let's go ahead and put a pressure sensor in here with, signal return, signal, and reference voltage, going back to the PCM. And when we're going to actually let the PCM also control a solenoid, it's going to block this vent, completely seal that off, so that whenever we apply vacuum, we can close this off with vacuum trapped in here, and we can read this pressure, and if the pressure leaks back up, we're going to know we got a leak somewhere. That's how that happened. Okay, so this is what's going on there. That little sucker there I've seen them with little screens in them, and I got pictures of that somewhere in my emission systems folder. And that silly thing will clog up with dust, and it'll throw a code saying that after I have capped this off and pulled vacuum on there, now it won't bleed back down because the stupid canister and or this little screen of this valve is clogged up with dust. Well, what did they do about that? Remember yesterday on the Dodge, whenever we was doing the smoke test thing, up there close to the canister purge solenoid, there's the little round thing. And when I unclamped the hose that we were using when we were checking for the smoke, the integrity of the system, smoke started coming out of this little round thing up there, and that's a filter. They let that get air not under there in the back of the vehicle where it can pull dust off the road. They let it get relatively clean air from the engine compartment area so that it doesn't stop up. On some of them, you'll see the vent going over there. It'll be like this. And as a matter of fact, I think that Sable is made that way. You're going to see your vent solenoid, which is going to look like that. It's going to have a couple of wires going to it. And it's going to be designed so that there's a hose where it's getting its vented air, and it'll be going to a doggone little air filter. So that anytime it's pulling dust in here, it's purging it with clean air. So you're going to see these with a filter on them. And that's just, I want you to make sure you understand why the filter's there. One of the things that you can tell somebody that's really had good training is they can walk up to just about any car and say, that's the EGR, that's the canister purge, that's the fuel pressure regulator. They can point stuff out. That's the map sensor. Without anybody, without looking at something and saying, duh, I don't know what that is. I don't remember. I don't want to hear that crap. You know what I'm saying? It's because the guys will open the hood and say, point out this stuff and tell me what it is, Well, on this car, I don't know what it is, but it kind of looks like, you can say that kind of stuff. Okay, so make sure that it's not, dusted and all that, because we have to replace carbon canisters. If you blow air through them and a bunch of dust comes out, it's time to replace them. Exhaust gas recirculation system should be working at idle and close as the engine approaches 2,500 RPM. True or false? We talked about that before, y'all. What does the EGR do? What's it on there for? Somebody tell me what it's on there for.
Recirculate gas.
Exhaust gas, not gas. Be careful. Qualify that term.
Okay.
Okay, so what's unique about the gas in the exhaust system? What makes it different from the air out here that the engine's pulling in normally? Well, it is. That's part of it, but it's also
cools it down before.
That's good. It's inert. Yeah, it's inert. It's inert gas. All right. Now the deal with that is when you're pulling inert gas in there, the combustion chamber is going to burn as hot. That's what we're wanting. All right. So you've seen me go out here, and you've seen me if some of y'all may have seen it but didn't remember it, when I go over and I crank up this Toyota engine, and I can reach under that EGR valve, and I can push that little diaphragm up and open that EGR valve manually. What does that do to the way the engine runs? It does. You seen that? Vacuum drops, and the engine runs like crap. When you're idling, I mean, it literally makes it go, and it just runs bad. And you remember I told you if you lay your hand on the exhaust or intake manifold and it gets really hot, you know the EGR is flowing. Like if you crank it up and it's been sitting there until it's cold, and you're feeling that exhaust manifold, intake manifold, get really, really hot until your touch, or you get a temperature gun, whatever. And then you shoot the pipe that's feeding the EGR. You know, the EGR valve. You got to be able to find the EGR valve. Usually there'll be a pipe. They'll have a pipe usually about that long, and they got that pipe there so that that exhaust gas will cool off a little bit on the way to the valve. Because you don't, if you're cooling the combustion chamber, let's cool the gas some before we put it running in there, right? So you shoot that thing. If it's getting blistering hot and you had never had your foot on the gas, then you know that EGR is flowing, and you got either a stuck open EGR valve or you got vacuum circuit that's, and because it's in a hostile environment and it works so hard and it's got exhaust going through it, they like to stick. And sometimes a little piece of solid material, carbon or something, will get in there. And when the EGR valve will open up and it tries to close, it'll trap that piece of solid material and it stays open, and it runs rough. So I've seen a zillion of those. Huh?
That's true.
That's absolutely false, Greg. You're not supposed to have EGR when it's at idle. And it's supposed to, the EGR valve is not going to work typically when the engine is cold. It's not going to work when you're at wide open throttle, and it's not going to work at idle. But if you're driving down the road at a steady cruise, you're pretty much going to see some EGR. And there is a feedback system in your OBD2 on all these cars. Some of them, the Jap automakers, they like to put a EGR temperature sensor. So if that starts getting hot, the computer knows that by looking at the temperature. General Motors, for years, they would look at the oxygen sensor. What's the oxygen sensor going to do whenever you start getting EGR flow? Anybody know? If you're displacing some oxygen, wouldn't you start seeing a rise in oxygen sensor voltage? When EGR starts to flow, wouldn't your oxygen sensor voltage go up? Really? Because remember that? Lean is low, rich is up. So if you're displacing some oxygen, I mean, you got to think logically through this, right? So, and also engine vacuum is going to change when EGR starts to flow. So those are all feedbacks. If you were going to design a system and you were going to type the code for the computer to say, how am I going to know? I know how EGR works. I know that it's going to open that diaphragm, open a little pintle, it's going to pull some exhaust in there, and it's going to put it in there really close to the throttle plate so all the cylinders, either that or I'm going to have a separate little port for each cylinder that's going to feed the exhaust gas in there. All the cylinders have got to get an equal amount of EGR. You don't want one cylinder getting more than the others or it's going to misfire and stuff like that. See? So how would I tell, if I'm going to type software, what other input am I going to grab so I can tell that, yes, I've opened the EGR valve and yes, EGR is flowing, because we need a feedback loop, even on EGR. That's what so much of this is about. Closed loop's all about the oxygen sensor, but there's a feedback loop on other stuff too. Mm-hmm. It knows whenever that it has raised the idle speed, and it's looking to see if the idle speed comes up when it tells it to go up. If I tell the idle speed to raise and it don't raise, I know there's a problem with idle speed control somehow. All that. Understand that?
Yeah.
All right. So know about EGR. What I need to do, and I've actually, incidentally, I passed out a worksheet yesterday, EGR familiarization. Did you guys see that? It's up there, right there. That is an important worksheet, and it's everybody needs to be really familiar with EGR systems. We got a bunch of different styles of EGR systems out here. They've got different ways of feeding back. And if in a really high-powered, interested class student would want to know, how does that Toyota out there know? And it's OBD2, so how would it know that the EGR is flowing? There's something. It'll tell you description and operation. It knows. So. The engine oil fill cap. Let's go back and burn that in. Exhaust gas recirculation is supposed to flow when? Come on in here, buddy.
Is it engine approaches 150 or 2,500 RPM?
Yeah, it's not supposed to. It's supposed to actually flow. The only time it's supposed to flow is at part throttle cruise, right? Part throttle cruise is when EGR is supposed to flow with a warm engine. That's when it's supposed to flow. Engine oil filler cap serves as an integral part of most PCV systems.
True.
You like that? All right, now y'all remember, let's see, that's question number 7. Yeah, that's true. So, let me ask you this. Remember, some of y'all might remember this. I think Casey was over when I did it. But if I'm looking at my fuel trims and I take the oil filter cap off, what's the fuel trims do? Remember?
What now?
If I take the oil filter cap off, I'm watching the fuel trims, I got a healthy engine, I'm running 0 fuel trim, and with the engine running, I take my oil filter cap off. What am I going to see the fuel trims do?
Go up.
Why?
Wouldn't it create, you was telling us something about that.
You talking about your
Cap.
oil cap?
Oil filter cap, the one where you pour the oil in, take it off.
Oh, yeah, 'cause it's got to grab air from or something from somewhere else, right?
All right. You understand the PCV system? Everybody understand the PCV system? On that engine out there that Lawrence has been working on a lot of the time by himself, there's a PCV valve in one of the valve covers. Well, actually, the PCV valve is up in the manifold, but it's got a pipe going to the valve cover. On the opposite valve cover, there is a pipe that goes to the clean air stream that's coming from the air cleaner. Okay, so as the blow-by from the rings goes into the crankcase, it actually gets purged out of there by the PCV system. That's what that's for. Now, that's a fully closed. Now, since the PCV system is getting fresh air from the hose, like on the ones that have mass airflow, that Chrysler doesn't, but on the ones that have mass airflow, it's actually measuring that air, isn't it? I mean, because it's coming from the intake air tube between the manifold and the throttle body. All right? Got it? So if I take the oil filter cap off, I have created an unmetered air leak. Where is the air coming from now? Instead of coming from downstream of the mass airflow, it's in the dadgum oil filter cap and going through there. And the PCM says, I don't know anything about any air. I'm not being told about this by anybody except who? The oxygen sensor is picking up on this extra air, but the mass airflow is not reporting it. Well, there's a couple of things that's happened if you got mass airflow. To begin with, since it's getting air from somewhere else, the mass airflow is reporting. It actually drops a little because there's air coming from somewhere else in most cases. And this air that's not being metered is going into the cylinders and it's changing the mix. Oxygen sensor picks it up. PCM says, don't know anything about that. We got to add some more fuel to make this work right.
Is that why some vehicles that die when you take the cap off?
Yeah.
Drawing too much air in there?
Yeah, occasionally. You remember the story I told about my dad changing the oil on the one after he replaced the thermostat, and after that it wouldn't idle because it had extra gas. PCV system was getting gas fumes out of the oil, and it had learned that, you see. And so when he changed the oil, it wouldn't idle anymore. You know, so anyway, it was a funny little thing. And when I told him clean the throttle body, take the battery cable off for a while, put it back on, it'll probably be okay. Anyway, make sure you remember that. Understand PCV. As a matter of fact, I'm probably, as a part of your final, as a really heavy part of your final, I'm probably going to ask you some top of your head questions about emission systems. So you got to learn PCV, EGR, fuel trim stuff. You got to burn that stuff in. You know, this is the advanced emissions course. Everybody needs engine performance deals with that. So does your emission system stuff. And in some parts of it, your electronics, is going to be tied in with all that. If the hose is in an air injection reactor system, shows signs of burning, most likely causes the belt tension not being tight enough on the air pump to overcome exhaust back pressure. That is absolutely false. What's usually the problem if you see, these little curved hoses, you go to these diverter valves in these, AIR systems. Air injection reactor is a GM word. Ford calls that thermactor. Now basically, it's an air pump. So if the air pump, everybody knows this. Watch this. This is important to understand too. I'm trying to get through this as quick as I can, but there's some stuff I got to tell you guys. You're going to see, how many of you have ever seen, you'll have, like on that Bronco out there is that Bronco's made, if you look at the back of the engine, you got your manifold here and all this, this is actually like a Dodge engine, doesn't Ford, but the fact is, going from head to head, you've got a pipe on that one. And that provides you with your upstream air. Right here, a little sort of a valve like that. And this goes over here to the plumbing on the air pump stuff. Now, you remember what I told you about these air systems? Whenever your engine's cold and the mixture is rich, you want to burn up this hydrocarbons that's coming out of a cold engine So what you're going to do is pump air upstream. And that extra oxygen is be like fanning a fire, and it adds an extra molecule of oxygen to these already hot stuff coming out of the chamber, because it's hot in the chamber even then. And that gets rid of most of your hydrocarbons. Well, you got low and high, and whenever you, later on, this valve diverts air away from there. And they don't want exhaust coming up into these rubber hoses because they're not made to handle all that heat. So they have a little flutter valve in there, and basically, it's a little thing, it's a little diaphragm plate sort of a thing with a bunch of holes in it. And in the middle, it's got riveted to it, there's a round plate, and it's got riveted to it a sort of a little metal membrane sort of a thing, so that when air is being pushed in there, it will push that little thin membrane away from those holes, and the air can go in there. But as the exhaust, which you also these pressure pulses in the exhaust, is going to keep that closed, so no exhaust goes this way at all. But air can go in, but exhaust cannot come out. Well, over time, this silly little thing starts to get split and cracked and starts to leak, and now all of a sudden you're pumping this superheated exhaust up into the those rubber hoses, and it burns them things up. I mean, the little valves that we've changed this are only way over here on these hoses, but they're made out of plastic. You know, your little heat goes in there, and you got a meltdown going on. Yeah. So all that stuff's got to be fixed, you see. But that little thing right there will go bad. Now, something else that'll happen is, on the earlier ones, this was just a sort of an anodized steel thing, or cadmium plated or whatever, and it would rust and break loose. You get a code 44 on the 2-digit codes, because what it would do is, when you're running your self-test, it would dump air upstream and see if the oxygen sensor spotted that air. You see? And then it would go downstream and then do one thing and another with the air. Upstream and downstream air were checked that way. And this right here will break, and what you'd see is the rubber hose hooks to this will be swinging over here somewhere, and this is all eat off. And that's fairly common to see on that. So, let's go back to this question. If the hose is in an air injection reactor system so shines of burning, the most likely cause is the belt tension not being tight enough on the air. That's nonsense. We got burned up one-way valves, whatever you want to call them. There are several different names for those. And that is question number 8. All right. So it's not going to be a loose air pump belt that's going to make them things burn up. If the hose is in, I'm sorry, I read the wrong question. A rattle from a catalytic converter after being smacked with a rubber mallet means the ceramic substrate has broken and the converter needs replacement. That's true, isn't it? If you hear that catalytic converter rattling, you need to put one on there. That's just the way that is. Air injection reactor systems are designed to pump the nitrogen found in the air of the catalytic converter to help reduce NOx. That's totally false. They pump downstream. The oxygen is what they're moving. It's going to make a difference. The nitrogen is totally inert for doing anything like that. Okay, let's whip through these other ones now. Of all the byproducts of a vehicle's combustion, which one can reside in the exhaust gas analyzer, cause erroneous readings, and damage the analyzer if not regularly removed? That's question number 11. Huh?
Water vapor.
Okay. Water vapor. Yeah, the water vapor is actually going to cause some issues. I'd still like to find the hose for my exhaust gas analyzer. I got to go looking for that. Got to do a bug hunt for that today. Is it desirable? It is desirable to have low amounts of the 4 of the 5 measured gases at all engine speeds. The only gas that's desired to have high percentages is what? What do you want high percentages of? CO2 is right. You want carbon dioxide. Why do we want high carbon dioxide readings? Because the trees and the grass really like carbon dioxide, and they're really happy. If the trees and the grass could talk, they would say, would you please build some more cars for us because we like the carbon dioxide that comes out of there. All right. Which of the following EGR valves will allow you to observe the actual pintle position on a scan tool? A, negative back pressure EGR. B, positive back pressure EGR. C, electronic EGR. Or D, linear EGR. Everybody like that?
What'd you say, D.
A D? You sure? It says on a scan tool. The actual pintle position can be observed on. Did you read that in your book anywhere? Have you seen it? Anybody know what the electronic EGR looks like there?
Let's see.
This is an electronic EGR valve, right here. See this electronic EGR valve? All right, now you might notice that there are 5 wires in that connector. I don't think I can show it to my camera. 5 wires in that connector. And those 5 wires in that connector, 3 of them are going to be telling the computer where the thing is, where it's at. And 2 of them are to drive the engine, the little motor that runs this thing, right? So that is an electronic EGR valve. And this one here is a vacuum-operated EGR valve that has to have back pressure fed up in here before it will even operate. So you can actually open this. Now what we used to do to see if the EGR valve was opening on the back of the engine, we'd lay our fingers up under there and we'd give it the gas, and if it was trying to open, we would feel that moving. That little diaphragm, see that I'm moving my finger? Mm-hmm. And it actually is opening up the passage between here and here. Now, if you ever pull an EGR valve off and you put a hose on it against your mouth and push it against it or whatever, and you can blow air through that EGR valve, just holding it in your hand, it ain't no good. And that means you got EGR flowing at idle. It's going to be a reading of your rough idle, okay? But there's EGR valves look a variety of different ways. Both of these are EGR valves, and they do the same job, but they're triggered by different mechanisms and all that. The linear one is the one. The C is the right answer to that number 13. 13 is C. Yeah, 13 is C. Now the
Wait.
You said a linear? That's the right one?
electronic is the one I meant to say.
Oh, okay.
C. I fouled up on that. All right, we got a call from Donnie Earl. Let's see what he's saying. Hello, Donnie. She's probably going to be, I'm going to say she's probably going to be leaving in about 20 minutes. No, not yet. Okay, no problem. All right, bye-bye. All right, so now then, it's supposed to be that's supposed to be C, that's the electronic EGR. The catalytic converter test that uses a pyrometer. Somebody tell me what a pyrometer is. You know what a pyrometer is?
Heat.
What does pyrometer mean? What would be the dictionary definition of a pyrometer?
Pyrometer.
Something that measures. What'd you say?
Heat.
Heat. Oh, that sounds like a pretty good answer. Something that measures heat.
Close enough.
Pyrometer. I've actually got a dictionary right here on my phone. I'm going to punch in pyrometer on my phone and see what it tells me about that. And if it doesn't tell me what the dictionary definition of pyrometer is, I'm going to uninstall this from my phone. Pyrometer. Search. Okay. Any of various thermometers used for measuring high temperatures. A pyrometer doesn't just measure temperature, it measures high temperature, which would be heat. Right? He got that, didn't he?
Yeah.
All right. So, the catalytic converter test that uses a pyrometer to check the temperature of the converter inlet and its outlet is called the ding, 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 ding. Come on, guys! It's not going to be the 5-gas analysis. It's not going to be engine shutdown test, and it's not going to be the oxygen storage test. It has to be the delta temperature test. Okay, so what is delta? If I told you to draw delta on the board, bingo, you got a delta. It looked kind of like a river delta. It's got about the same shape, doesn't it? Isn't that interesting? And it also kind of looks like a D. You see? I was one time talking, we went to a service bay diagnostic system update class whenever I was in Ford. And it was the guy that taught the class was wearing a lab coat. And he goes, if I get to talking above your head, just somebody come up here and kick me in the seat of the pants. And well, he was just kidding, you know what I'm saying? But I mean, he kind of reminded you of Sylvester Stallone, the way he talked and looked and everything. But he said he's wearing his white lab coat. and somebody was asking him about something, how does the SBDS measure this, that, and the other? And just without missing a beat, he gets up there and he writes this big formula on the board. It's got the squiggly lines and all this. And, he was just thinking in that realm. And I said, somebody kick him in the seat of the pants. I said, we don't understand any of those marks you're putting on the board. But he was doing that in that just like that, and none of us knew what he was talking about. But the fact is, I've always remembered delta as, and there's a reason why they use that, but I'm not going to go into that right now. So you're talking about A on that one. Studies indicate that at least blank of the hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, and oxides of nitrogen that pollute our atmosphere come from the automobile. What's the percentage that comes from the automobile?
No, it's in.
You like that? Would it be C? 50%? 50% come from the cars? We've got quite a few cars out there. All right. Now then, these questions here are the fill in the blank ones. These are the really easy ones. These are the ones that Ben really likes. Aren't they, Ben? Ben, don't you just love these? Ben's got his book open there, and he's a man on a mission today. The 3 exhaust byproducts we are concerned with controlling are what 3, Ben?
Carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, and oxides of nitrogen.
Very good, Ben. Ben gets a hand for that. Yay, Ben. Hydrocarbons in combination with other compounds can produce ground level ozone, or what's that name? What do you call ground level ozone? It's a 4-letter word. Smog. Or if you wanted to say it in a redneck way, you could say smog. But
Johnny say small.
kind of like hog. All right. That's kind of like a redneck doesn't say, and I'm a redneck, so I can say that. But a redneck doesn't say brass. He says brass. That's the way they say that. All right. So, combustion chamber has areas that are. The combustion chamber has areas that are cooler than other areas. Due to this fact, the complete combustion of the air-fuel mixture is impossible. That's a crummy deal, isn't it? Engine designers reduce the effect of this through combustion chamber design and piston ring location. So what is the name of, what do they call that? That's question number 18. Huh? Quenching. All right, now, what is one place that you can think of that's going to happen on just about every engine where it puts out the fire because it's so cold?
QUE.
Huh?
Oh, I'm trying to say the greenhouse spell quenching.
Oh, I'm sure. Quench. All right. Look at this. The little place,
ING.
and this is a sort of a bad drawing because the rings are actually squeezed in like this.
Oh, I'm sure.
See that? That's the top of the piston, right?
Sure.
All right, so,
Like he says, the
well, you're making fun of my artwork. All right, now that right there, see, that's the top of the piston, isn't it? Duh. All right, so you got a ring here, and there's a third ring down here too, which would be your oil scraper. But that place right there, between the cylinder wall and the piston, there's a place right there between the top of that piston and that ring where there's nothing burns worth a flip. Because it's just such a tiny little place. But it is a place where quenching takes place, and there's other places too. So what they do is they're putting the piston rings closer to the top of the piston than they used to, so that will reduce that amount. I mean, I don't know if that's in your book anywhere, but that's the way it is. All right, so that's quenching. That last one was. The component designed to store the gasoline vapors of the evaporative emission system is called the... The component designed to store the gasoline vapors for the evaporative emission system is called the... One word. No, EGR recirculates exhaust gas. What'd you say? Canister? Spell that.
CANISTER.
Very good. He didn't put 2 N's in it. Sometimes when I spell that word, I want to put 2 N's in there, and it messes. And I'm saying I always have to remember that it's only got 1 N. CANISTER. All right. Alrighty then. Blank occurs toward the end of the engine's power stroke. Sunburn fuel and other products of combustion, such as water vapor, leak past the engine's piston rings into the crank case. What do you call that? Whenever some of the stuff that's been squeezed in the combustion chamber and all this pressure is built up in there goes past the rings and get into the crankcase. What do you call that? Blowback. And the PCV system is there to take care of that, right?
Blowback.
Everybody ought to know that. The blank vents air pump output to the atmosphere during deceleration, so the combination of a rich mixture and extra oxygen doesn't cause backfiring. You know, whenever you got like a throttle body engine or a carbureted engine, and Casey's a tremendous advocate of carbureted engines, and that's okay. When you're driving along down the road and the carburetor's sitting on top of this intake, and you got all of this gas and air mixture going through this intake, while all this is going on, you're going to have that beading up on the inside of that intake. There's going to be beads in there of gasoline. You let off, and the pressure drops. All of that suddenly boils into vapor and goes through the cylinders into the exhaust. And if for some reason or another, in this hot exhaust with this unburned fuel that came from these droplets in there, you let off and some oxygen goes in there, you get this big backfire. Boom! You know, and it can blow the muffler up and scare the car out of somebody out there, and you know, sound like a. You know, I was going to tell you, I had when I had that bicycle that I got tired of putting in the area when I was about 10, 11 years old. I put 60 pounds of air in a tire that wasn't supposed to have but 30 in it or something. Well, you know, it was. I wanted to figure if I put twice as much air, it'd take it twice as long to leak down. I had to push the bike 2 miles to the store. That's where I didn't have a camel patch kit in my back pocket in them days. I eventually learned that if get Daddy to get me one of them, I could get pliers and a screwdriver and fix it side of the road. Anyway, I put too much air in it, so I'm riding home drinking a 16-ounce Pepsi, and I get in front of this house where these sharecroppers lived out there. Tire blows out. Boom! They come busting out on the porch saying, "Who shot? Who shot?" It sounded just like a shotgun. My Pepsi went one way, I went the other. Blew that tire out of that bicycle, never rode again. We don't get another tire, we find another old junky bicycle. But anyway, that had to have been in 1964, you know, or something. That was a long time ago. All right, so the blank vents that air pump output to the atmosphere during deceleration, so the combination of a rich mixture and extra oxygen doesn't cause backfiring. What part does that? We call that the diverter valve. And on some of the engines that have carburetors and throttle body on them, you may hear that diverter valve when you rev the engine up and you let off. You may have heard under the hood, if you got the hood open, you may hear something going. You ever heard that? That's the diverter valve dumping that oxygen to that air pump air to the outside air and keeping it from going to the exhaust. And if it goes down there, it'll backfire. Also, you remember when I was talking about all of that gasoline beading up on the inside of the intake? That doesn't happen with a regular fuel-injected engine. Now, let me ask you this while we're on the subject. What causes dieseling? And I say dieseling, I mean when you shut the car off and it keeps running. Boom, 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 boom. You ever had that?
Beginning of the semester.
Remember that? I did. I talked about it at the beginning of the semester. And is it possible for a fuel injection engine with electronic fuel injection to diesel? And if not, why not?
It is, It is possible.
I mean, what would have to happen in order for a fuel-injected engine to diesel?
What do you mean by diesel?
When you switch it off and it tries to keep running, you ever had that? You've had that.
Yeah.
That's called dieseling. There's no spark. You got no spark in there. But when you switch it off, it goes dum. I've actually, my old pickup used to do that sometimes, and I'd put the darn thing in reverse and switch it off so it wouldn't do it.
Sometimes whenever you drive your car real hard and you get home and you do that.
Yeah.
It's because deposits are left on the inside of the cylinder wall.
Carbon deposits are left in there. Furthermore, if you have air, if you happen to have, if it's a carburetor so that it can keep pulling gas in there, and if you've got an air leak somewhere, if the timing is a little too high, or it's got an air leak so that it can pull air in there. Carburetors used to have a little valve that when you'd shut off the car, a little valve would go click, and it would close to shut everything off so that no idle. You got your foot off the gas, and everything going through the idle circuit is, if it's pulling air through the fuel through the idle circuit, it'll do it. So they'd have a little solenoid to go click, and when that solenoid went bad, and sometimes they would, or that little thing would stick, the carburetor wouldn't idle. So you screw this little thing out and pull that little plunger out, and it would idle, purr like a kitten, nothing else running bad. But sometimes you shut it off and go. Well, I had an Explorer that had, three of them that had fuel injection on them, pure old electronic fuel injection, just like the one on the one Casey's working on and the other one working on. And when they shut the darn thing off, it would diesel. And I said, why in the sound is causing that fuel injection engine to diesel? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. Well, you know what the problem was with that? The EGR power relay, which powers up the injectors and the engine controller and all this kind of stuff, when you turn on the key, that EGR power relay closes, and the computer and all the solenoids that the computer operates are fed voltage. Well, that relay was stuck closed. When I switched off the key, I'm killing the ignition system because that came directly from the ignition switch. But I've still got a computer that's awake. I've still got fuel injectors that are awake. I've got a crank position sensor that's still pumping out little squiggles.
Yeah.
So the engine controller, it can't fire the coil, or the coil's not going to fire. But everything else is still working. We're still squirting fuel and everything because the engine controller doesn't know it's been shut off.
Like the car's possessed when you cut it off.
Yeah. Boom, 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 boom. Yep. Remember that? I don't know. Some of y'all. I talked about this the other day. Some of y'all may have seen that movie that had Steve Guttenberg on it called "Don't Tell Her It's Me," and there's a cute girl in that movie that drove a great big old Oldsmobile '98 or Buick or some big old long car. And she parked that thing. She went to this house and she was going to go and try to find somebody or something in this upstairs, in this house. So she parked her old car out in front of the house and she switched it off and it was dieseling and blowing smoke. I don't know how they made us do that for that movie. But she got out of that car and she went in the house, went all the way up the stairs, looked in that room, came back down, got back in the car and it was still dieseling. She it sat there in diesel for 2 minutes. Yeah. That was funny. She just switched the key back on and it's running again, but I still remember that. I mean, that was tickle the heck out of me. But, that's a comical thing anyway when one diesel like that. It irritates you when it's happening on yours every day, though.
We was the answer 21 was.
That one there is going to be the diverter valve. 21, I'm sorry, excessive pressure. That's well, I don't know if I even saw that. PCV system. I'm sorry, 21, the excessive pressure that build up in the crankcase will destroy seals and gaskets and cause oil leaks. If this occurs, it's likely a fault in the PCV system. We got a contract for a little while at the Ford place to do all of the work for Coca-Cola. And one of the mechanics on the other side of the shop over there got a job. He resealed the engine on this Astro van to pull the engine out and pull the oil pan, the valve covers, and just totally resealed it because it was leaking from every seal the engine. And then they ran it over there to me to check out the tune-up part of it and the emissions and all. And I noticed that the PCV system was totally inoperative because the vacuum that feeds the PCV system is actually fed from underneath the throttle body on that throttle body injection. And it was all clogged up with carbon and there was no vacuum at all going to the PCV valve. That's why it blew the seals. So if it blew all the seals, you need to be checking the PCV system, y'all. Can you remember that? That's an engine repair thing. Check the PCV system. When you pull that vacuum line, is everybody listening to me? When you pull the vacuum line loose from the PCV valve, it ought to sound like a hurricane. And if you pull the vacuum line loose and it's barely got any vacuum there at all, that's going to be when you got oil going into your air cleaner. You seen the oil in the air cleaner syndrome? You seen that? You got that hose going to your air cleaner and you pull it off and it's got a bunch of oil in there. And that's because the oil vapor is going the other way because it can't. If you pull that line that comes after your air cleaner and you put your thumb over that other line, you ought to feel a slight vacuum there, or it ought to be just dead air. If you feel pressure there, you got some issues. All right, let me hit you with this. Let's say that you've got one that's running really crappy and bad, and you've checked everything up on top. There's not any external vacuum leaks up here where you can see them and all. Now listen, I'm going to just tell you this instead of trying to get you to prompt you for an answer. You pull the PCV valve out of the valve cover, you pull the closure hose out of the other side of the valve cover, and you stop those suckers up good and solid with your thumbs, with the engine idle. Or whatever you can stop them up with, you stop them up so that they can't get no air. All right, if you let that thing run, and I can show you this out on the car, if you let that thing sit there and idle for 25, 30 seconds, and then you move your thumbs out of them holes, you're going to see, that's a ton of blow-by. You're going to see a heck of a lot of blow-by in that little bit of time. But what if I've pulled my PCV valve out and got it out of the way, and I stick my thumbs in both sides of those valve covers, and I leave them in there for 30 seconds, and I pull it out, and it goes, and it's got a vacuum there. What's wrong? I'm talking about on a V8. or V6. It's the intake gasket is blown underneath on the bottom side. Yeah, the gasket on the intake is sucking air out of the crankcase from under the bottom, and that's what's making it run so bad. See, you won't be able to pick that up if it doesn't have any external vacuum. You might even not get it with a smoke test. See what I'm saying? All right, now let me ask you this. Let's say that I capped off my, my throttle body, and I pumped smoke into my intake looking for a vacuum leak. Where would I see smoke come out in that case? It would come out the PCV hole and I'd see it coming out of the crankcase, wouldn't I? You understand what I'm saying? Everybody clear on that? That's a little solid little thing. You ought to try that sometime. Get you one. It ain't hard. It don't take long to do that. Just take that thing loose and stop them both up for a second, then move your hand. You'll see how much blow by is going by those rings. It's a heck of a lot. Okay, now that was number 21. 22, we already answered. The effectiveness of the catalytic converter is largely controlled by the performance of what, which provides oxygen needed to oxide what? CO and HC. I'd say oxidize. I don't use the word oxide there. CO and HC. What system? Performance of what?
That's your sensor?
No.
Oh, okay.
The oxygen sensor is going to provide oxygen. Think about your answer now. Yeah.
The OT.
And that's number 23. What about one of your elements in the catalytic converter? One of the things that makes them want to saw it off whenever the saw's off. That's a cerium oxide stuff there. All right, number 24. Three-way catalytic converters use blank, which is an effective catalyst for oxides of nitrogen pollutants. You may have even seen jewelry made out of this stuff. Rhodium. Some catalytic converters will be close coupled or mounted as close to the engine as possible. Can you think of one? You know these little Japanese cars I'm always talking about? It's got this coffee can size converter right there at the manifold. I've got a close coupled catalytic converter that was laying on a bench out there for a long time. You know that one that we changed out on at Altima? This is due to the fact that converters are dependent on what to effectively start to work? High temperature, y'all. Because the combustion chamber is hotter. That's why they call that first one a light-off converter, because it starts it. It starts the...
What was 22 first?
23. Somebody tell him what 23 was.
Serial moxide or real moxide.